By the time Fede Alvarez's 2013 remake of The Evil Dead rolled around, horror was in a very different place than when that franchise initially got its start. The market was now flooded with remakes, sequels, and reboots, even as early as 2013. Between the turn of the millennium and the release of this movie, the following horror projects got rebooted, remade, or was given a soft requel reboot thing. Scream, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, The Omen, Black Christmas, Halloween, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho got remade in the late 90s, The Thing got a reboot, prequel. So when Fede Alvarez's version of The Evil Dead rolled around, it was kind of following that trend. But while Fede Alvarez's version of The Evil Dead is certainly following in that trend of cashing out on old horror franchises, this may be the best horror remake to date. Hi, I'm Matt Keim, and welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Hi, welcome back to Scope Networks, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. As always, give us a like, comment, subscribe. And for those of you that might not have been familiar, Evil Dead Rise, the fifth movie in this franchise, is coming out this month. And so we decided to take a brief look at some of the other installments in the Evil Dead series. My last video was taking a look at the original classic Evil Dead, so I decided to take a look at the franchise's first attempt at making a modern movie reboot series. But the landscape of horror and filmmaking wasn't the only thing that was different since the release of the original Evil Dead. Between 1981 and 2013, there were two other movies that came out, Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2, and those two movies kind of set the tone for the rest of the franchise and what it would be. Evil Dead 2, I don't want to get too deep into it, but they lost the rights to Evil Dead 1, and so the first 15 minutes or 20 minutes of Evil Dead 2 are a remake of that movie, just to catch people up on the story and then show what happens to Ash next, and then that's the movie where Ash kind of becomes this wisecracking, funny, badass type with a chainsaw for a hand, saying groovy and all that. And Army of Darkness took it about 5 steps further with that, with the whole time travel thing. Yes, this movie series has time travel in it. And then beyond that, there were games, there's comics, there was an Ash versus Jason comic. And so this franchise certainly took on its life. And one of the unique things about this horror franchise is that its central figurehead, because the monsters are basically possessed zombified people, and there's no physical shape to the monsters when they're not possessing someone. Ash became the central figurehead of this entire franchise. It's not like Halloween or Friday or any of the others where it's a silent dude in a mask, but the mask is the most recognizable part of the series. Scream is always going to be around the Ghostface mask, regardless of who is wearing that suit. Nightmare on Elm Street's a bit different because Freddy talks, but still, it's based around an antagonist. So that's one of the unique things is it's always been centered around Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, and the character of Ash. And so this movie took a really interesting direction and doesn't have Ash in it. Yes, he cameos in a post-credits scene, but this movie is not about Ash. This movie kind of decides to follow in the footsteps of the original Evil Dead movie as opposed to following the tone set by any of its successors. And so in keeping with that, Ash isn't in this movie. This movie is very, very, very slim on comedy. Much like the original Evil Dead, it's way more horror-focused and way more focused on a completely different set of characters. By the way, as always with these reviews, I will spoil them, but I'm going to assume if you're watching this, you've probably already seen it. If that's an unfair assumption to make, turn the review off, go see the movie, come back here. So Evil Dead 2013 follows Mia and her brother David, Mia played by Jane Levy, of all people, and as she is a drug addict who is going into the woods for a few days to basically go through withdrawal. Her friends are there to support her. So right away, this movie is a much more dour tone. Unlike even the first movie, they're not there to have a vacation or have fun or anything. They're there and they kind of know it's already going to be a miserable time. They just kind of underestimate how miserable it's going to get. All the drug addiction storyline isn't exactly the most unique or original thing in the world. It's a very clever use of this idea by the writers. because a lot of scenes that do happen in the original happen in this one. So like they find the book, you have a character getting run down and attacked by trees. It's just as horrifying. The tree scene is just as horrifying in this one as it is in the original. But because it's the Jane Levy character Mia that this is all happening to, and they all kind of expect her to be a little mentally frazzled by by withdrawal, other side effects of the addiction. Nobody believes her when she says something is going on. Even when she starts getting possessed and starts acting out, people still think that it's kind of just what is kind of supposed to be happening. So they don't believe her, and there's a very, very clever out that the writers use to establish that tension. What it does is it introduces a couple levels of dramatic irony. The first one being that if you're seeing this movie, you've seen at least one of the other movies, so you know what these characters are in for. And then two, even when things start going down, it takes a while for the other characters to kind of get on the same page with what is going on, even though at least one of the other characters and you, the audience, know they're dealing with forces that they completely do not comprehend at all, and they need to get the hell out. And so there's that running tension, and right there, this movie's trying to tell a different kind of story, and where, like, subtextually, it's about Mia overcoming her inner demons and inner addictions. And following that, it's no coincidence. This is actually one of the big twists. She gets cured of her possession, but she also has to fight like a demonic version of herself. She's the first one to get possessed in this movie. You think it's going to follow the footsteps of, like, the original Evil Dead, where you possessed, you're dead. And it's like the brother character who has to save the day, and he'll be the final girl. So the movie kind of flips that around. The brother character dies, and Mia has to fight like a demonic version of herself to win in the end. And so because the subtext about the drug addiction is there, you are a little bit more emotionally invested in her journey because she's been through so much, you want to see her come out on top. And so that was And so that subtext is not really something that's always been there with this franchise. I thought it was a welcome change, especially because the writers make it very clear they do not want to just follow the footsteps of the original, even though they're kind of taking the same path. They go back to that same cabin in the woods. Hell, you even see like Ash's car from the first movie rusting in the background of it if you look closely. But it's not trying to take the place of the original, it's just trying to tell a different story within that same universe. And to this effect, Fede Alvarez actually says it's supposed to be within the continuity of the other three movies, and ostensibly this one is still canon for the next one. And that would be great because I really, really like the character. I really like Mia, and I would love to see Jane Levy come back to this franchise. I don't know if she ever intends to do it, but I know Fede Alvarez at least expressed interest in coming back at some point. One of the other things that this movie does really, really well is that because Evil Dead was a giant franchise by this point, it had a hell of a lot more money to play around with than the original movies ever did, and it makes great use of its budget. Like that final scene where it's raining blood, they use something like 70,000 gallons of blood when they're raining it down. The effects are so gnarly here. If you're not a body horror fan, don't watch this movie. This movie is intense. It gets gross, man. There's like a scene with a nail gun. There's a scene where someone cutting their own tongue with a knife. It's like this movie goes for it with the body horror. So if that's not your thing, this movie is probably the most intense movie in the series to date on the body horror stuff because of the lack of comedy and the lack of some of the stop motion, but still relying on like practical effects. The movie just kind of highlights the sheer horror of what's going on. And there's some other like clever tricks that happens. There's one girl who is being mutilated, and it's after the other characters have started fighting her off and like started cutting off limbs to where the demon leaves her body. And so all she knows is that her friends are carving her up for no reason. And so this movie emphasizes the sheer horror of what's going on and the sheer grossness of it. This is not a feel-good movie. That if you like the Evil Dead for a wisecracking Ash fighting off goofy looking monsters with a little bit of gore and a lot of blood to it, this might not be the movie for you, but this movie still more than justifies its own existence. And like I said, it's not like this movie reinvents the wheel, but it picks a path, it sticks to it, and it sticks the landing within the constraints it sets up very well. It makes great use of its budget with the effects. The characters, for the most part, are all pretty likable and believable. Like, this guy, he's kind of obnoxious, but, like, for the most part, there's a lot more dramatic tension happening than normally goes on in these movies, and that was a welcome change. This movie makes it clear it doesn't just want to do the same thing over again, even though it's taking the same general roadmap. And so I can't help but respect that this movie certainly has its own identity. The characters are a lot more intriguing. I want to see Mia come back. Fede Alvarez directs this movie very, very well. I have a lot of really good things to say about this movie because it just is so well executed. Again, this movie is definitely not going to be for everybody, but I think as far as horror movies go, as far as horror remakes go, it's not only a green light, but it's probably the best of the horror remakes, just because of how much it tries to tell its own story. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. I will be talking about the rest of the franchise throughout the rest of the next month and a half or so. I'm definitely going to talk about Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. Don't worry, I'll get to them. And then some of the side ones, because there's Ash vs. the Evil Dead, there's the original short film that I want to talk about, and then there's Evil Dead Rise, which is the entire reason for me doing this series. So are you guys going to see Evil Dead Rise? What did you think of Evil Dead 2013? And if you saw it, do you kind of agree with how people hold it in esteem as far as remakes go? As far as remakes go, what else do you like? Are you guys excited to see Evil Dead Rise? Are you going to see it? As always, give us a like, comment, subscribe. We have some really great stuff coming out later this summer, and I cannot wait for you to see it. We got some more role-playing stuff coming up too, so if you want to see Ben kill myself and everybody else in very creative ways, yet again, tune in. And as always, it's Full Stop Reviews.